What's up guys, Rogue9 here and I'm back with some more Battlefield 1. Today we have a slight change of pace and we'll be looking at some gadgets, specifically the explosive gadgets of the assault class. Which ones are used the most versus which ones are used least, and how effective are they against infantry or various types of vehicles? There's only one way to find out, so let's go for it. As always, we'll start the video off by exploring the usage of each of these gadgets, and as with the grenades, we're not going to be looking at a percentage of the usage time, but rather as a percentage of shots, which is the number of times deployed, since that will give us the best idea of the relative usage for these gadgets. This data is as at the 31st of May, and as you can see, the AT grenade is by far the most popular, being deployed 44.3% of the time, followed by the AT rocket gun, 28.8%, the Dynamite, 20.2%, and the AT mine, 6.7%. So there's a hierarchy in terms of the usage preference by the players, and this is normally the part where I focus specifically on the least used weapon and start comparing and contrasting it with the others. And that makes sense when you're comparing firearms, since they are the same in their functionality and their purpose, poking holes in the squishy bits of your enemies. It's a bit like comparing Pinot Noir to cotton candy or Riesling grapes, which as we all know is of course acceptable in polite society, but as I established in my least used scout rifle video, comparing apples and oranges, that's a big no-no. And in fact, trying to directly compare the four assault class gadgets, which differ considerably in their purpose and especially in their functionality, would be like comparing, I don't know, a bunch of pears, a stick of sugarcane, a small bunch of straight bananas, and a rather squashed melon. But of course, you all know all of this already, so long story short, rather than trying to compare and contrast these rather different weapons, we're going to be simply looking at the stats and capabilities for all of them. Now, we all know that guy with 100 stars on his Automatico who actually runs away at the first sight of an enemy vehicle, leaving you as the medic to deal with it on your own. But despite things like that happening quite frequently, the assault class is technically supposed to be the anti-vehicle class, so let's start out by looking at the various capabilities of the different gadgets against vehicles. Now, I'd say there's probably like 5 different types of vehicles in the game: heavily armored vehicles, light armored vehicles, armored cars, unarmored cars, and motorbikes. Oh, and I guess horses as well, I suppose. But all of these light vehicles are a relatively small threat and they are relatively easily destroyed, so my focus here will be on the armored vehicles. To figure out the various gadgets' capabilities, I've been running some tests, because hooray, we finally have a HUD in pre-match gameplay. And here are the fruits of my labor. Damage stats for all 4 gadgets against all of the armored vehicles. As you can see, the AT grenades are relatively effective, doing between 20 and 21 points of damage against heavy armor and around 27 to 29 points of damage against light armor. Where you hit the vehicle and at what angle you hit it doesn't really matter, the damage is pretty consistent. With the rocket gun, things are slightly different. Of course, if you hit the vehicle at too steep of an angle, your shot is likely to bounce and will only do 2 points of damage. So you want to make sure that you get as much of a straight-on shot as possible, and in my tests the weapon did between 17 and 18 points of damage from the front and the back of the heavy armor, and between 14 and 16 points from the sides. For the armored truck, my results were pretty consistent. I had 28 from the front, 29 from the back, and 27 from the side. But against the FT-17 light tank, the armor-penetrating capabilities of the rocket gun varied quite considerably depending on where you hit it. Shooting from behind and hitting the frame at the back of the tank caused the least damage, only 17 points. The next toughest target zone was the turret, where the rocket gun could only do around 21 points of damage. The sides of the tank are more vulnerable, 28 points of damage, and the weakest part seems to be the entrance hatch at the front of the tank, where I could cause 32 points of damage. But if you saw Fog of War's breakdown of the FT-17, none of this should be much of a surprise. When it comes to the damage capability of Dynamite and mines, things become really simple. Dynamite, placed close to an enemy heavy vehicle, will do 25 points of damage, and against light armor between 30 and 31 points of damage. Mines, on the other hand, will do 50 points of damage against heavy armor and 61 against light armor. So what this all boils down to: against heavy armor you need 5 AT grenades, between 6 and 7 rocket gun shots, 4 sticks of dynamite or 2 AT mines. Against lightly armored vehicles, you're going to need 4 AT grenades, 4 sticks of dynamite or 2 mines, and while the armored trucks will also take 4 rocket gun shots, the FT-17 can take 4 to the hull, 5 to the turret and 6 to the rear frame. So there you have it. Mines are really great at destroying vehicles as long as you can get your enemy to trundle over them. Dynamite is weaker than I would have expected it to be, and while AT grenades and rocket gun shots are even less powerful, at least you have a little bit of reach with them. But fighting against vehicles is only a small part of Battlefield. Let's now see how these weapons stack up against infantry. The blast damage of the AT grenade is 89 points, but if you hit an enemy directly, you can also do a collision damage of a further 2 points. The inner blast radius at which the AT grenade will do its maximum damage against infantry is 1.5 meters, slightly smaller than that of a regular frag grenade, which is 1.75 meters. After this, the damage potential drops off quite sharply and reaches 0 at 6 meters. A direct hit with the rocket gun will instantly kill enemy infantry, and while the blast damage in the code is listed as 65 points, in my test it consistently delivered 64 points of damage, with an inner blast radius of 2 meters and an outer radius of 5. Both the Dynamite and AT mines have the potential to instantly kill any infantry around them with damage of 100 and 200 points respectively, although the damage drop-off for the Dynamite is much flatter, starting at 1.28 meters and going all the way up to 6.4 meters before it reaches 0. AT mines will do their full damage up to 2.56 meters, but will no longer cause any blast damage after 3 meters. And since the baseline damage is listed as 200, that means at 2.78 meters you can start to survive a mine detonation, and only 22 centimeters further on you won't receive any damage at all. Your starting loadout for each of these weapons is 2 AT grenades, 4 rockets and 3 dynamite and mines, and all 4 of these gadgets can be instantly refilled by a small ammo pack. Keep in mind though that if you've used up both of your gadgets and maybe a lot of primary and secondary ammunition as well, a single small ammo pack will not be enough to refill everything. If you're trying to refill your ammo from a large ammo pack, it takes 5 seconds for each AT grenade, rocket gun or dynamite bundle, and if you've used up all 3 of your AT mines, refilling the first one will take 5 seconds and then the second and third one will take 1.6 seconds each. Also keep in mind that if you've used up both of your types of gadgets, they will not refill in parallel, so first your primary gadgets will be filled at 5 seconds each and then your secondary at an additional 5 seconds each, with the exception of the AT grenades though, as I explained. Looking at the initiation method for each of these gadgets, let's start off with the AT grenade. As with most of the other grenades, the timer for the AT grenade doesn't actually start until it's close to the ground. If the grenade has traveled a long way, it will detonate almost instantly after hitting the ground. If on the other hand you dump it straight on the floor in front of you, it takes around 2.675 seconds to explode, which is significantly slower than all of the other grenades, but when used against vehicles, it does have the advantage of exploding on contact. Rocket gun shots simply explode whenever they hit something. Dynamite can be detonated with a remote wireless plunger. Wait, am I reading this right? It says wireless right here.
Yeah, just go with it.
A First World War bundle of dynamite detonated by a plunger that is not connected to the dynamite, and you can do it from anywhere over the entire map.
Yep, that's how it works.
Well, okay then. Dynamite can of course also be detonated by shooting at it or blowing it up with some other kind of explosive. And last but not least, AT mines are very similar to this. They either blow up in contact with a heavy object such as a vehicle or a horse, or they can also be blown up by shooting at them or using additional explosives. In addition to being great against vehicles and infantry, most of these gadgets are also great against solid obstacles. Enemies hunkered down in a building or behind locked steel doors can be quite challenging for infantry to deal with, but the rocket gun and especially the dynamite or AT mines can level the playing field quite quickly, and that both figuratively and literally. But now that you know how all of these gadgets work in detail, it's time to summarize. But before we get to that, here's another little vintage message I have for you.
We interrupt this film for a special newsreel. Many of our nation's finest young men have already heeded the call to join one of our most elite fighting forces on the EU sector, the Rogues Raiders Platoon. It is my great pleasure to announce that the platoon is now at full strength and achieving initial success on the battlefield. With the prospect of a Russian intervention in the war still only a distant hope, it is vital that we continue to organize our troops. And it is for this reason that we have formed a second platoon, which will be known as Rogues Roughnecks. If you missed out on the chance of joining Rogues Raiders, now is your second chance to sign up and make a difference. Do not delay, your country needs you. Join Rogues Roughnecks today.
As so often, I can fully understand the usage patterns for these gadgets. They all have both an anti-vehicle and anti-personnel application, but it seems the anti-personnel application that decides the ranking. As discussed earlier, both the AT grenades and the rocket gun have great versatility, and even the Dynamite, since you're able to blow it up whenever you want, can be a useful active weapon. And that might be the key word here, because the mines are almost exclusively passive. Most situations in which you'll be using mines is just placing them somewhere and hoping that at some point a vehicle comes by and detonates them. Sure, there are some applications where you can use them actively, say to blow down a steel door or destroy a structure that the enemy is hiding in, but you can only do that if you're not actually engaged in a firefight at the time. And harming the enemy with them only works if they're standing still, and you're able to get close enough to deploy the mine, then have time to get away, then have time to detonate it in some way. And that, in my mind, is the reason it is so underused. It's not something that helps you actively in your personal fights, even though placing them in strategic locations and then disrupting the enemy vehicles can help your team out a lot. So let's quickly look at a few strategies with which to maximize the impact you can have with your AT mines. Placing individual mines in different locations, of course, gives you more of a chance to actually hit an enemy vehicle, but since a single mine is incapable of actually destroying that vehicle, you're not really doing a whole lot of good. I would say always make sure to place at least 2 mines close enough together so that any vehicle that hits one of them is fully destroyed. And here there are really 2 valid philosophies in my eyes. One is to place all 3 mines in a row perpendicular to the expected direction of travel of the enemy vehicles, thereby maximizing your chances of getting a strike, but also increasing the chances that the mines are noticed. A really good map where you can pull off this technique is Foul Fortress. Place 3 mines in a string just underneath the waterline of any of the crossings, and your mines will not only be almost impossible to spot, but they're also in a position where sooner or later a vehicle is bound to come past. On other maps, you may be able to hide your mines in different ways, behind walls, amongst the clutter of different crates, boxes, underneath bushes, who knows. But quite frequently these are places that aren't actually high traffic routes. And that's where the second philosophy comes in, using only 2 mines, placing them very close together in a hiding spot, and if necessary creating that hiding spot yourself. A great way to hide mines and make them almost impossible to spot for vehicle drivers is in the craters of previous explosions. And since you only need 2 mines to detonate an enemy vehicle, you can, if required, make your own crater. Here's an acronym that can really help you remember this technique. Step 1. Place a single mine. Then, step back, detonate, then place a second mine, and place the third mine. Pzdpp. As long as you remember Pzdpp, you can have great mining success on the battlefield. Of course, mines can also be very useful when dealing with an enemy behemoth, specifically the armored train, but also to a degree the Char 2C heavy tank. And if you manage to sneak up on an enemy vehicle from behind, mines can also be a great active weapon. Just place 2 of them beneath the enemy vehicle and then detonate. So what's my final conclusion? Well, yes, as I said before, I get it. The AT grenade and the rocket gun are just so versatile that they are a great asset on almost any map and in almost any game mode. But when it comes to the Dynamite and the AT mine, I think the Dynamite is kind of overrated. It only does 100 points of damage, and that only up to 1.28 meters distance. So a single stick of Dynamite is not even very likely to kill an enemy infantryman. And yes, AT mines are the least versatile and they are the least useful against infantry, but being able to strategically disrupt the enemy vehicles can be of great value to your team. Does this make the AT mines a hidden gem, or maybe an obscure semi-precious stone? Not Not quite, I think. But I do think they deserve a little bit more love, especially since they are persistent even when you're killed. So a valid tactic could be to bring out a batch of AT mines, place it at the beginning of the round, and then when you die, you can respawn with whatever gadgets you want. Your mines will stay there until they are either discovered and destroyed or they do their job. But as always guys, those are just my opinions and I look forward to hearing yours in the comments section below. Are you an avid mine user and have you found any tricks or strategies that are particularly effective? Do let me know, I'd love to hear about them. And that is it guys, as always I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, a like would be very much appreciated, as is constructive feedback and criticism of course, and I will see you in the next episode.